Father, thank you for just the truths that we learn about ourselves, about others as we dig into your scripture. And Lord, just tonight, would you again unveil things to us, Lord? Would you show us things that would be tools in our arsenal as we work as parents to train up a generation behind us to love you. And tonight I want to pray that just even as we use examples, as we go through things, Lord, would you bring things to mind and to light that'll just be super helpful in the hands of each of these parents, Lord, that these little ones will grow up to know you and to love you and to serve you. Father, in Jesus' name, amen. Amen. So it's our last night tonight, and I wasn't sure how long this course was going to be, because we've never actually done a parenting course, but it's actually worked out quite well. And so tonight we're starting to move. I'll do a few things on little kids, and then we're going to slowly move towards teenagers. But the thing is this: I don't know if you found this, but almost any subject around this subject is actually often relevant to us. It's often relevant to life. So even if you don't have teenagers yet, this will be helpful to you. And one day, if you've got little kids, you're going to need to know some of these things. So just a few things as we dive in. The Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. One of the key things that we need to do with our children, to be honest, pretty much from when they're born right through, is to bring them into the lives of people that are going to be a good influence, not a bad influence. And children are very impressionable. So who they're with, who they spend time with, these things can ultimately corrupt even character that's been put into them, which is good. And so be wise who your friends are. Be wise who your kids are going to be spending time with, because if a family carries a very different value system to you, it gets really hard for your kids, especially if those parents are very lax and kind of the kids can run amok and do whatever they want. Your kid can start to feel resentful if you don't, because it just seems unfair. And they need to work with your children's hearts to try and keep them close to you. And so but this is true while they're kids, but even more so when they grow up to become teenagers. There's this weird moment as a parent where you start to realize that your influence isn't what it was, and that your kids are starting to actually glean and learn values from others, and often from friends. It's almost like kids, as they grow, it goes from us as a unit to suddenly they've got this need to fit in. It feels a little bit like they need to fit in a gang. And if they find a good gang, it's amazing, because that good gang will be a good influence on them. It's good company. But if it's bad company, it's very, very hard to keep your kids on the straight and narrow. And so ideally, if we've brought them up in the house of God, if we've brought them up in Christian community, they grow up with their friends, and that's their gang. And so those kids hopefully are carrying similar values, especially if they're in a similar church. And so there is a sense that this helps us, because now that influence helps us instead of working against us. And so just think that through. And pretty much through your child's life, I think we've got to be careful to watch who our children are spending time with. Now, there is a side of our kids also are a doorway into the community for us. And so in some ways, you want kids to also have unsaved friends, not just have Christian friends. But we kind of have to steward and kind of, in a sense, watch each individual child. How strong are they in their convictions? Can they stand, or are they being led astray? And if a child is easily led astray, you have to keep them a bit more protected. But if the child is able to engage in that world and not actually get peer pressure influencing them, then you can give that child wider and wider space. So for me, the Bible says children are like arrows. In some ways, they're weapons. If you ever plant a church, you want kids. They are a massive door into every community you're going to go into. And so your kids can become an incredible way to reach the community with the gospel, because they can get to places we can't, and they open doors for us. But you have to watch that your children, while we're doing that, are not themselves being corrupted by the world that they're being thrust into, especially on a church plant, because there's nothing yet. So you're it. And so in some ways, you're reaching out with these things. All right, so just some thoughts. Then I wanted to dive into something which is kind of an awkward thing to speak about, because I mean, we family, and there is a sense that more and more as we grow as a church, we will spend more and more time with each other, get to know each other. Our kids will literally grow up in each other's homes. And that's a beautiful thing, and it's one of the wonderful things of the kingdom. Like I think MC mentioned, Nelson Mandela said, it takes a village to raise a child, and this becomes the village. The danger in this, though, and you need to be aware of this as parents, is that sometimes people come into the village that don't always carry the values of the village. And sometimes they can almost, it's a well-known fact that, firstly, there's broken people in church, that many of them are new Christians, but also you actually get wolves. You actually get people who are found in the community and their heart is actually evil. And we see this right through the Bible. Because it says church at the door and people are nice inside doesn't mean that everyone loves Jesus and is actually committed to the values of God. And so one of the things we've got to be careful of as parents is who do we, for example, sleepovers? You've got to be very careful. Whose house do your kids sleep over with? Because people can look very Christian on a Sunday, but behind the scenes, sometimes there's some really broken things. Now, in a good Christian community, we do get to know people better. And so it's not just like you see them on a Sunday. You actually start to get to know people. And normally home group leaders and elders would get to know the brokenness in people. And so we can somewhat there are some safety mechanisms in place in terms of just living on the light. But be very wise who you let your kids sleep over with. And remember this, even family members can sometimes do things that they're not supposed to do. And so normally what you'll look for in people who you're going to, in some ways, trust your kids to, is you want to look for people who are showing godly character in every sense of the word. Like these are people that have served Jesus for years. They're known in the community. Ideally, they may be leaders, but even there, they can sometimes hide deep, broken things. And so you've got to really know them. And we were very careful growing up who we let our kids sleep over with, because we just realized we're not there to protect her. And she, in some ways, is under an adult's influence, and it's dangerous. Plus, it needs to be said that sometimes kids do things with kids that they're not supposed to. And so these are all things we have to be aware of, because we don't want our children to go through the trauma of these kind of things. And so pick wisely. Again, you can have friends, but normally we were very careful who we let them sleep over with, or even go to the afternoon in their homes. Thankfully, we did have some really amazing godly friends, and so our daughter grew up with those people, and we trusted them with our lives. But these are just things to be aware of. Don't think about it, and don't be slack on this, because at the same time, it's just one moment, and there's now deep repair that needs to be done as this child has to go through the trauma of what they've experienced. We can also teach our children, in some ways, as they grow, to be careful, or to not be easily taken advantage of. Little things like to teach our children that that there's certain parts of their body that are private, and no one goes there, even an adult. And we would have these conversations with Enya when she was small, and in some ways trying to make her as bomb-proof as we could, in the sense that she wasn't going to be easily taken advantage of. And then watch her. You can watch, you can sometimes see if something traumatic happens to a child, it normally manifests in something like bedwetting, or there's some kind of, you'll see something, a deep moodiness or withdrawal. Keep watching your children, because these can be signs that they're going through trauma. And that trauma might be sexual. It could be something that's happening at school. It could be something, there's so many things, but watch your child and watch for patterns that are different, because you can often pick things up early and hopefully help your child, protect them, or take them out of that scenario. But don't place them near danger if you can help it. Also, little things. I think Hollywood is one of the devil's greatest tools. Yeah, it's interesting. Los Angeles, I know it can mean city of angels, but it can also mean, the message. The angelos is another word for the messenger. And I think in many ways, this city has become a demonic messenger to the world. You think of movies now, in first dates, people are pretty much going, every base you can think of. And so what that does is it normalizes sin. It actually indoctrinates society to think this is normal. And so kids growing up thinking this is normal. It's you're weird if you don't do this. And so in some ways, if you're allowing your children to watch things that are sacred and they're just being made of no value, they in some ways being cheapened, your child doesn't think those are beautiful things to treasure. You've by letting them watch things, you actually are slowly helping them get destroyed. And so remember this, you think today, 150 years ago, women on the beach wore more than women sometimes wear in churches nowadays. And this is the reality of a sliding society. And with that, our children are growing up in a world that's very hostile and in some ways very, very dangerous for them. It's the little things. Like I remember whenever there was kissing when Enya was small and growing up. Close your eyes, because even kissing is it's sacred. It's a beautiful thing. And so she's kind of, and still now, when she watches a movie and something weird starts coming up, she's like, fast forward, and she's now 19, turning 19, because for her, this is a sacred thing, and I don't want it cheapened. I don't want Hollywood. And so just be aware of these things. What we allow them to watch forms and fashions their values. And so be very careful what you let them watch. All right, so moving towards teenagers, and this is obviously a journey that happens, and it happens very quickly. Everyone says you enjoy them when they, before you know it, they're old. I can't believe my daughter's moved out of my house last week. It's just nuts. Like it happens so quickly. It feels like it's just a blur, but very quickly they become teenagers, and that's a whole new ball game. It's like everything changes as they start to grow up. And in 2 Kings 17:41, one of the key things that we see again in the scriptures, it comes through all the time, is God's talking about his people, and he's frustrated with them because they're not living the way he wants them to. And he says, even while these people were worshiping the Lord, they were serving their idols. To this day, their children and grandchildren continues to do as their ancestors did. It's quite interesting. They do what they see. And again, before you parent your child, parent yourself. Because at the end of the day, you create the environment in which your child is going to grow up in. And if you are looking out and making sure that you are temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, loving, that's something that they will emulate. They'll imitate you. It's a principle in creation. God said when he created everything, he said, let each reproduce according to their kind. So here's the thing, your children will often become a reflection back to you of your own brokenness. And so in some ways, the first place to start is getting yourself, as fast as you can, as quickly as you can, allowing the Lord to sanctify you, which means actually making decisions to change. It means, not just, well, this is who I am, because then your child's going to say, well, this is who I am, and I'm a teenager right now, so tough luck. And in some ways, you've got to show them that you are working on you, and they will then imitate you. If they watch it, you are progressively doing your best to love Jesus, and they're watching you change, that gives doorways for them to change. Otherwise, your children will just become a reflection of you. We want them to emulate what's Christ-like in us. We don't want them to be broken. They're gonna model themselves after your life. All right. Now, as they grow older, if you put good foundations in, it is easier. Sometimes the challenge is we start this journey like around you get saved, and maybe your kids are already teens, and it's a whole lot more difficult because in some ways they don't have the undergirding or the foundations that you're building off, which means you've got to try and do a patch-up job and then kind of retroactively try and work back into them so that you can teach them the ways of God well. And so as they grow from, children to teenagers, your relationship does start to change. In some ways, you do become less of the law, less of this is, my way or the highway, and you become more of a friend. You become more of an influencer, and your authority definitely somewhat does wane. And in fact, if you're leaning too much on your authority when they're teens, you're probably going to make them rebels. And so in some ways you have to move from authority to influence. Does that make sense? Influence means I'm helping you to see why this is a good thing. I'm shaping you through influence. Now that said, if a child is totally going off the rails, And you might have to go back to authority, but you don't want to keep it there long. You want that child to learn to stay on the rails for themselves. Do you understand what I mean by that? And so in some ways, if they're doing well, you can give them more and more freedom. But if they're not doing well, you have to start to narrow down, because they're not acting as mature adults. They're acting like children with too much freedom. And so in some ways, you've got to then come alongside them and shape them and mold them. And so remember this, while my daughter's a friend to me now, but I'm still her dad. And as much as the relationship has changed, and I don't, I remember actually I think it was about 2 weeks ago, I was talking to her about something, and it was the first time that she spoke back very honoring to me. I said, honey, I think this is happening in your life because of this. And she looked at me and she said with the greatest honor, no attitude, just said, I don't know, Dad. I think it's this. And actually it was the first time she said something, and I was just like, I just shut up after this. I was like, okay, I think you might have hit that one on the head. I missed that one. And it was, but she did it in such a way, and it's cool that in some way she's finding her own way forward now. And this is what we want. We want our children, we actually want our children to thrive without us. That's the point of parenting. I am forming you so that when I'm not here, that you will have an amazing life. In some ways, everything that we do is to train them to not need us. Now, at the start, we have to train them to need us because they need that. But my heart isn't that I'm going to keep you in this perpetual dominating role. My heart is that to see you mature and become a whole individual that can stand up on your own with your own values, with your own beliefs against the tide, and you'll make the right decisions because of the training that was put into you when you were young as you've grown. But the challenge is teenagers prevent new challenges because, boys and girls, suddenly there's hormones that weren't there before. There's emotions. There's sex drives. There's friends that are changing, and suddenly girls go from they're all little princesses running around to what you see on the movies at Hollywood, and it's just like schools with the in crowd and the not in crowd, and it's just all these things that are now within society that your child has to navigate their hearts through. And so we've got to try and be there for them and to help them find their way through, and to find their worth not in the clicks, because one of the dangers is this, and watch your children. Sometimes a child will find its worth in something, or it could be its looks, especially if it's developing a bit of it's getting attention. It'll start to try and find its worth in its looks. And so now it's walking around trying to get the attention of boys. It's actually a deep brokenness in that child to do that. You shouldn't need anyone's attention. You've got God's attention. Why do you want anyone else's? You should be whole within yourself. But kids start to try and reach out to themselves to find their sense of worth and their sense of validation. And now we have to help them navigate their hearts through that, because that foundation, if she's finding her sense as a girl in guys, it's not long she's going to be sleeping with guys, because this is going to be how she thinks she's going to meet it. And now you've got trauma like you cannot imagine. As a guy, if you start he's going to find his sense of being, the cool guy or the, whatever it is, the football player here in this nation. You've got to be very careful that he's not finding his identity in those things, but that his identity is in Jesus. And then he doesn't need these things. And so you've got to help them steward their hearts, because that's what the system pushes them towards. That's the devil's system trying to corrupt them. And you've got to try and help them and shape them and speak to them. And we'll talk a bit about that just now, how to help them navigate their hearts. One of the big questions you're going to have is, again, what can my child withstand? How bulletproof are they? How much? And there's questions like schooling, which is a big thing. I'm not sure how it works in the United States, but in South Africa, I'm guessing you've got private schools here and public schools. Do you have any say? Public school, could you pick between 2 or 3 schools, or is it like you're in this area, that's your school? How does that work? That's your area, that's your school? So the challenge of that is this: if you're in a broken area, it's you can have schools and you can have schools, even public schools. You have good schools and bad schools. You have schools that you just think, I don't want my kid there, and you've got other schools where even a public school, where it's actually not a bad ground. They can find peers that are not going to be bad influences on them. And so you've got to, again, steward that thing. So one of the things we've tried to work through, and I think MC touched on it last week, is what can our child, can they stand? I don't want to totally isolate her. I want to expose her little by little so that she gets kind of a resistance to pressure. But how much can she stand? And in some ways, as a parent, we're stewarding the souls of our children. And we're watching what they're processing. We're watching how they're processing. And one of the things you've got to watch for is if they are being overwhelmed, if they can't stand with the foundations you put in, you sometimes have to consider moving them out of that scenario. You try and help them overcome, try and help them navigate their hearts, but sometimes you've got to pull them right out of that scenario. And so there are options like homeschooling, which sometimes is just, as a single mom, that's going to be really hard to do, but we've got to start looking at various options, which could mean, if you are a married couple, possibly you need to move into a smaller house because maybe you're both working, but if you cut your costs, you've got your child for such a short time. I guarantee you this, your child will feel more valued because you were there with them than if you can drive a fancier car. And at the end of the day, one of my best memories for me growing up is my dad was a super successful businessman. And I remember at one point he was just working so hard we never saw him. And then we moved, he realized at one point he was going on, he sold his house to move somewhere else. We stayed in a caravan for about 4 months. Do you know my dad took us to America, we went to Canada, he took us all over the world. Do you want to know what my best memories were? That caravan. It was so cool. We were like camping for 3 months. And it was such an amazing thing. And children don't value what we value. We think we need to give them the best schools and they need the best parents. And so just realize this is a season. In some ways, your responsibility is to bring them up. They're only with you a short while. And then to, in some ways, let them walk into all God has for them. So think that through and think through this thing of private or public schools. Some of us can't afford private schools, but we've got to try our best where we can to put our child in the facilities that or the places that they can flourish. I realize in the real world, you've got the ideal and the real. We always want to aim for the ideal. Sometimes we have to live in the real. And so you sometimes have to realize, we just can't do this. Well, as a single mom, I can't do this. But there are sometimes creative ways of doing this. And again, I don't know how this system works in America, but sometimes we've seen churches that have actually started little cottage schools where you'll have 4 or 5 parents together and they'll just start something small. And between them, they can bring up those children and still, moms can still work. So there are options that we could look at as our kids grow. But in some ways, you've got to, don't throw them to the lion's den until they're Daniel and they know how to stand in the lion's den. Do you understand? It's like if you put them in dangerous places too soon, it can be really difficult for them. At the same time, if you overprotect them, at some point when they are in dangerous places, they've got no antibodies. I think, for example, when the first missionaries first went to Hawaii, this is not in my notes, but it's just something I'm thinking of. I remember reading that when the first missionaries went to Hawaii, the common cold in Europe was the common cold. But the Hawaiians had never been exposed to the common cold. And so when the missionaries came to preach the gospel, they brought with them influenza. And it nearly wiped out the local population because they had no antibodies. They'd been so protected that when they were exposed to something small like a cold, a sniffle, it literally killed them. And in some ways, if we're overprotective with our kids, if we don't start to put them into scenarios, when they do get in those scenarios at some point, they do not have the capacity to stand. And so in some ways, you've got to build resistance into them. Think of like building a muscle. You don't want the muscle to tear, but I'm building resistance into you. I'm putting you little by little into the devil's playground, and I'm watching how you stand. And as soon as I see you falling, I'm pulling you back, and I'm training you some more, and then little by little, I'm incrementally exposing you so that you can learn to stand on your own. You've built muscle. That's how you build muscle. Does that make sense? So be careful. We can go too far. Too protective is bad. If it's not, when I say too protective, if you isolate your kids too much, it's not going to be good for them. They do need some ways to be exposed to difficult scenarios. And sometimes the lessons they learn, even in the pain of being in the scenarios, can be super helpful as training tools because you teach them how to deal with life. And life is tough. And so in some ways you're teaching them, even as they go through the trauma of a broken friendship, or they're not in the end clique and their friends are ugly to them, or whatever it is, you're teaching them how to live life. And so don't always rescue them, but steward, can their soul stand this? And can I help them steward their soul through this? All right, so you got to keep a good eye on them, and you got to keep your bridge close with them in terms of relationship. And the big question is: are they swimming or are they drowning? And you've got to watch that. What are their signs that they're drowning? What are they doing to try and let you know that they're not coping? Because they don't always know that. They don't always know themselves. They're not yet mature, so they can't say, "I am not coping." They're just acting up and playing up because they don't know what's going on, and you've got to try and read through what's going on here. And part of that is because you're in relationship with them, you know them. All right. So now as they're growing, there's this dynamic change. In some ways, when they're young, you like the law. And the law teaches, it says, no, and there's consequence immediately, and there's reward for. But as they grow, we've got to almost train them that they're no longer doing things because of outward rules, but they're doing things because of an inward conviction. Which means you've got to help them know why this is the way they do it. And this is something, as they grow, you start to do. At some point, you saying no isn't enough for them. They need to know why for themselves. Otherwise, when you're not there and the time of testing comes, they do not have the conviction to stand on the things you've taught them. They're just secondhand truths instead of truths that are not formed in them. So you've got to, in some ways, think, how do I form this truth that it becomes your truth? I know this is good for you, but how do I teach you that you know that this is good for you? And these are the questions you start to have as they become teenagers. As kids, you don't reason with a child. It's a child. I've seen parents try and reason with a child. It's like, it's a child. Just no, yes, boundary, consequence. But as they grow, you've got to take the law away. You've got to take that boundary away, and you've got to start teaching them how to make good decisions on their own. And so this takes time. And again, I would say this: if you can at all, try to be a stay-at-home mom, if you can, because this is a full-time job. Now, I realize sometimes we can't. Again, the real and the ideal, but keep aiming for the ideal, but do the best that you can in the real and get before God and say, God, help us to do this well. All right. One of the things that you'll notice as they grow is new influences, or things that suddenly start to become important or shape and form them. And we mentioned earlier, obviously, friends, but I'll start first with one of the first new influences that will happen when they become teenagers is they start to find themselves in a different level. And suddenly they are becoming mature physically, they are... And part of what they're going to start to do is to try and find who they are. And part of what they're going to do is they're going to test the boundaries, which often means why teenagers become sometimes quite painful. They're testing the boundaries. You've taught them things. Now they want to know for themselves. Is this just mom and dad? And if they start to think mom and dad are just old fuddy-duddies that just want my life to suck, you're in trouble. You've got to try and get the point where you're winning their hearts, that they know you for them. You're not just here to, you didn't just put boundaries on them so that they made you, shut up and sit down because I don't have the capacity for you. That's a bad foundation. They've got to believe as that time comes that mom and dad actually love them and want the best for them. They're going to become selfish, self-centered, full of attitude potentially. They think too much of themselves. They think they're adults, and they're like, I like 23-year-olds that think they're adults. And I'm like, dude, you know nothing. You're like, It's part of trying to develop and find who they are. Now, I wouldn't say you know nothing like that to my child. I'm saying that here. All right. And then you've got to help them navigate. In some ways, you've got to talk. And I think communication is probably going to be one of the most key things as they become teens. If you've built a bridge of communication with them and they feel they can talk to you, this is how you influence. This is how. And so in some ways, you've got to be, and you develop it when they're small. Little things. If you raise your voice at them, they clam up. You're losing the ability to communicate with them. They won't talk to you. So you can't afford to shout at them. You can't afford to get angry with them. You can't afford to let them, because all of those things causes them to climb up and not trust you, that you don't feel safe. So now I'm going to try and find who I am outside of you. And so again, if you find that you've done these things, apologize, repent, get before the child and do the best you can to change. Because again, that can be a learning thing for them. But at the same time, you just can never raise your voice. They should never see you angry with them. Everything you do has got to be loving. It could be very consequential, but it's not like I'm doing this out of anger. I'm doing this because I want the best for you. And so as they grow, they feel that you are approachable and they feel they can speak to you. But you've got to address their attitudes, their cocky attitudes. You've got to address when, one is, especially when there's kids and one's ugly to the other one, and, little things like, go say you're sorry. Go and say you're sorry. And then it's like, sorry, but it's not, no. And we've got to help our kids to do these things in such a way that they're doing it in an honoring way. Because the problem is, if that's what they're doing to their siblings, that's what they're going to do to their spouse one day. And you want to know why marriages end in divorce? Because people don't know how to speak to their brothers and sisters. Because very quickly the romance wears off. And now you just suck. You're just my husband, or you're my wife and you suck. So we've got to teach them to show dignity and respect in all these areas. And one of the ways we do that is losses of privileges. As they grow, we start to give them, and we'll talk a bit now about, hopefully I'm running out of time. We'll start to give them, in some ways, think of this. The more my child is making good decisions, the less I'm going to be there to control those decisions. I'm going to let her free. And so there's an incredible space of freedom as she's making good decisions. But as she makes bad decisions or bad responses, I'm going to be there, and I'm going to become the narrowing place for her. And so in some ways, and so she learns good decisions leads to life, bad decisions leads to consequence, because that's what life is going to do to her. And so in some ways, I am going to be addressing, and I want to be taking away privileges. I'm going to be taking away, going to bed earlier. I'm going to be doing things to her as she's a teen, so that she learns bad behavior is not cool and it hurts you. And all right, then the second thing, obviously the big influence that comes in, it's not just them, which we have to help navigate. The second big influence is friends. And realize it is just a reality. My daughter's actually been an amazing little girl. She was a handful when she was young, and then she just got on the rails, and I trust her. I totally trust her. But what was I going to say to you now? Influence, friends, I realized at one point, are a massive influence. I want her to choose good friends. I don't want to just be the one that says you can't hang out with that person because they're bad. I want you to learn those things. And so again, as they're teens, this is communication. How did you feel when you're with that person? I noticed you were playing up. I noticed you come back different. What's happening to you? And so you start asking them questions that they start grappling with their own hearts. Like, well, why am I feeling like this? And then you need to help them understand that this relationship isn't a good relationship. It's doing something in them that's not good, and it's costing them. They're losing the spaciousness of obedient, good living. And so in some ways, they start to make decisions and move away from relationships that are going to be bad news for them. And they do need our input. They don't know what they don't know. It's a statement. Often when guys plant a church, we say this. He doesn't know what he doesn't know. And that's a scary thing, to not know what you don't know. And in some ways, as parents, we've got to try and help our kids to know, to make decisions that are going to be good. And the only way that's going to happen is by watching them. Not like I'm out to catch you out, but just taking the time to listen to them, to hear them, that they're seen by us and heard by us. I think there's a lot of debriefing that happens with teenage kids. How was your day? DMC. My girls have got this deep, meaningful conversations, DMCs. As a dad, you just got to sit down and realize DMCs is a part of being a dad if you got a girl. I think guys are different. Guys are like, how's your day? Oh, fine. Mom's like, no, talk to me, Johnny. I want to know how your day was. Girls are like, if you give them a moment, they will unload. And if you're here if you're not just if you're going to hear them and not just clamp down on them, they will open up to you. And that's a precious thing. You want her to open up to you because you're probably the safest person on the planet for her potentially. You love that child more than anyone else does. And so you want to keep that thing precious, and you want to be careful that you don't say things that make her clam up or pull away. With guys, you need to try and do fun stuff with boys. Go out and do things. I think guys often form their friendships around stuff they do together. So do fun stuff, and it's dad and son time. Go away on a shooting weekend or something, and just connect and spend time as you're sitting shooting, teaching them about life. I'm thinking of we got all the LEAP students, and they've asked me, where do you want to take them for 3 days just to spend time with you? And I'm actually thinking of taking them into the desert where I go shooting, and I don't know if 3 days is a bit long for that, but maybe for a day and a half, because there are so many things in life that I can teach them about as they shoot a gun, as they aim, and so in some ways, it's what I enjoy doing anyway. But this is the kind of thing you do with your boy. You want to do things with him that are cool and fun, and he's feeling like he's growing, he's learning his boundaries, which is a big thing for a young guy. He wants to know physically where his boundaries are, which probably means he's going to wrestle with you a lot, and every now and again let him win. But it's just helping our kids understand and grow into their boundaries. Debriefing is a big part of things, though, and talking, which means, and again, every family, you've got to work out what works for you. Our family runs like this, and every family is different. There's no one size fits all. Our family, pretty much, I wake up earlier than anyone else in the house, always have. And I normally get up really early, and in the dark, I'll have a quiet time. I'll start a bit of admin. If the waves are good, I'm going to shoot off surfing. They're all sleeping still. I paddle out in the dark. I do my hour as the sun's rising, jump in my car and drive home. Normally, if I'm home, they might still be sleeping, but normally they're starting to rise up at that point. And then we kind of have breakfast on the run. We just often, on weekends, we might do a sit-down. MC will make scones and or bacon and egg, and we'll sit down as a family and enjoy it. But normally breakfasts are on the run for us. Kids are going to school. Everyone's... But dinner is lunch, everyone helps himself. Dinner is sit down and eat. And that's time where you don't want people on their phones. The family sits down and we're going to eat together. We're going to talk together. And it's time to connect. It's time to debrief. You're creating moments where the family can just be the family. Otherwise, you can live past your kids for so long that you don't even realize you're living in the same house, but you are foreigners to each other. You don't know each other. And so try and create moments where you can, again, the real and the ideal, there's seasons you can't, but seasons where you can just sit down as a family and talk and connect, play games, do things together as a family. Be very careful of phones. I think cell phones have destroyed more families than we understand, especially kids. They get sucked into those screens. And again, put boundaries in your kids. Cell phones are so addictive. I've seen adults addicted to them. Your kids are thrown to the lions with cell phones. And so again, I think Annie was 14 before we allowed her a cell phone. And even then, she only had it for WhatsApps or messages. She wasn't allowed on social media at all. And little by little, we grew that because we realized as soon as she's exposed there, you think of porn on phones now, and you don't have the capacity right now for this, and you're going to get sucked into this. And even as we've given her freedom, we've at times had to come back to her. We gave her, I think, 45 minutes a day, I think it was at first. How much was it? It might have been 15 minutes, then 30 minutes, then 45 minutes, and then an hour maximum. That's your WhatsApps, messages, phone your friends, that's it. But then we took that away, and she's free to now be on the phone as much as she wants to. But still, I have to say to her sometimes, my girl, you're on your phone too much. I'm hearing that, which I think your governments, I think in Australia, it's now illegal for a child. It's illegal for a child or a teenager even to have social media. It's illegal because the governments are realizing this is destroying lives. I think America's talking about it, and I think they're starting to make phones that are, because your kids are exposed to things that, man, I was never exposed to as a kid. I mean, And as a child, you do not have the character to stand against some of the things that are bombarding you. So be very wise how you bring up your kids. And again, if you're in a church community where this is what everyone else is doing, it's quite cool because your kid just knows that's how it is. But if all their friends are like, it's a very difficult thing for your child to navigate because they feel like they're the odd one out and there's something wrong with them. And wow, why am I in this family? This family sucks. I want to be in that family. And those are all things that they grapple with. Actually, they don't realize it, but they're probably in the best family of all. But at that age, they don't see it. They just want what everyone else has got. So take time to communicate and take them on dates. If you've got a daughter, take her on a date, man. You should be the first date she goes on. And just her, not her and her brother or her and her other sisters, just her. And just take her out to a little restaurant. Where do you want to go? I'm taking her out. You can buy flowers, sit her down, and just connect with her. How are you? What do you, just hear her out. And if she starts DMCing, just listen. Sometimes when my two girls start DMCing, I'm like, as a guy, I do feel a little bit overwhelmed. It's like, how long is the story going to take? And how much information is there in the story? Because as a guy, it's kind of like you do shorthand. And it's kind of a big, sometimes I've got to dig deep to sit there and listen to the whole thing. And the other thing, how many of you seen the movie of It's Not About the Nail? It's this lady speaking to her husband. I should have actually got it ready. It's this lady speaking to her husband, and she's got this nail pegged in her forehead. And she's talking about this terrible headache she's got all the time. And it's so hard, and she can't even concentrate. And he's like, honey, there's a nail in your head. And she's like, don't try and fix it. Could you just listen for once? Because this is so painful for me. And she's going on, and he's just like, all he's seeing is the nail that he wants to fix. And this is how guys are. I often say, now we're getting into marriage training. Guys want to fix things. I often say, if you put it on me and I can't fix it, I get exhausted. I'm just like, I want to go bang my head against the wall. I want to fix it. So sometimes I've got to put my fix it thing away and just listen and ignore the nail. Because
No, he's very right. But so I would say to him, I've learned now, go, babes, I'm talking to you as a friend now, not a leader. Take your leader off. I'm just talking as a friend. And then, yeah, and that helps.
But there's times where, and again, sometimes my daughter comes to me and she says, Daddy, and I'm like, I'm sometimes dealing with, and I've got to determine, does she need me to hear her now? Because she needs to know that she's my priority. So if need be, I'm going to drop whatever I'm doing to listen to her. Or is just something that's just passing the time and I'm like, honey, I'm sorry, but right now I'm really dealing with something. Are you all right? Are you okay with this? And then I'm going to go to her afterwards to make sure that I build that bridge back up to her and get her to talk again with me. Does that make sense? I think with boys, again, it is different. But again, you've got to spend time with them. You want to be doing things with them that is fun. If the family in their child's mind is, this is the coolest place. We have such fun as a family. That's where they're going to want to hang out. And that's where their friends are going to want to hang out. And then as they grow, we've got to teach them how to develop their own disciplines. MC mentioned every single morning I sat down with Enya when she was young and we sat down as a family. I'd read the Bible and then I would do a little teaching out of, and I would try and make it simple. I wasn't going to read the King James Version. I was going to read the New Living Translation or maybe the Kids Bible. We even looked at the Kids Bible, the one that MC mentioned. What's it called again? The Action Bible. It's literally a comic. It's like the Bible in a comic form. But as a child, we'd let her do this. And then we'd sit and read a story together. She loved that Bible. She would spend hours in it. And I'd rather, as much as it's not the Word of God, it's a comic with some basic odd scripture in there. But it's teaching her the lessons of the Bible. There are scriptures, but it's not the whole Bible. It's like Samson killed whatever. And but then I'll talk to her about I'd bring a little lesson that was kind of age relevant. In other words, something that I think she was processing or facing. So I'm trying to let her learn that as she reads her Bible, she's getting keys for life. But then as she grew, obviously your Bibles change and you start to read real Bibles with them. But then as she grew, at some point I realized I need her to read her Bible when I'm not there. And so at some point, I started having less of those times because I wanted her to read her Bible for herself. And I'm trying to, in some ways, train her now to actually read her Bible on her own. And what is Jesus speaking to you? And if she gets stuck, I'm there and she can come and say, Dad, I don't understand this. And I'll tell it, explain it to her. But I'm trying to teach her to find that discipline without me. In other words, I'm taking her off the rails that I've been for her life. And I'm, in some ways, letting her find the freedom to find her own tracks. And that's something we have to, I think we have to do. I know I have friends, godly friends, that have had family quiet times until their kids left home. We just figured, I think I want to train her to do this on her own. We're always here and we do worship together and we do things together. We talk about Jesus all the time, but those things for her are things I want her to learn. And I'll watch her, and little questions like, have you read your Bible today? Oh, I haven't yet. Babes, it's such an important, just keep reminding. And then the beautiful thing is at some point, and this is probably the best thing as a parent, you start to watch the foundations and the things you taught them becoming their own values. And it's such a cool thing when you start to see them out of their own, realizing the truths that you've taught them from they're young, but it's become a revelation to them. And they're reading the Bible for themselves and finding God for themselves. The best thing is when they, again, a godly youth. And unfortunately, again, you get youths and you get youths. Some youths are just orientated around entertainment. And as much as a lot of kids will go to those youths, it's not a great foundation. I spoke at the biggest youth in one of the biggest cities in our country in South Africa once. There's probably 600-700 youth at this one church. And while I'm preaching, kids are making out in the seats. While I'm talking, and I was just like, there's no way in hell my kid's ever going to come to this youth. It's just, you get youths and you get youths. Be wise what church you let your kids go to. This is just a reality of like just the values that they've been learned and taught. So again, be very wise. And again, the need for us to build a godly community that kids can grow up in. All right. Quickly, I'll finish with this one and then we'll have a break. One of the things that will start to happen is at some point, if they're starting to fall in love with Jesus and believe in him and your faith is becoming their faith, they're going to want to start to get baptized. You're going to have like what happened recently. Someone gets baptized or their friend gets baptized. Now they want to get baptized too. And there's quite of a hard thing to know as a parent. Part of you just wants to say yes. And there's another part of you like, are you doing this because your friends are doing this? Or are you doing this because you know Jesus and you know what you're doing? A lot of kids will just do it because their friends do it. And I think as parents, we're so excited that they're making any step towards Jesus. It's like, yeah, but just rather slow it down. And I remember with Anya, she wanted to get baptized, just slowing it down. Honey, why? Well, why do you want to do this? And I wanted to know. I wanted her to. And at some point, she kept on. And at some point, she came to us, and it was hers. It was her faith. She'd started having encounters with the Lord at different with friends, and God was doing something in her. And how old was she when she was baptized? Maybe 12, probably about 11, 12 when she was finally baptized.